Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandra Wong. I'm the Officer of Taiwan Affairs for the Organization of Asian Studies at the Elliott School. Thank you so much for all being here today. I'm just going to take a little time to introduce OAS, as we call it. So OAS is a student-led organization that tries to connect young professionals interested in Asia with professionals working in the field. And we try to share cultural experiences, expand the academic experience, and try to connect DC policy community with the classroom. And in addition, I'd like to add that today we will be live streaming the event, and I think there's a few live streamers out there at this moment. And I'm going to introduce the director of the Seeger Center for Asian Studies. His name is Professor Benjamin Hopkins, and I would like everyone to welcome him. Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for what is the final of our Taiwan conferences / roundtables for 2018. We annually do 4 of these, and I'm really happy to do today's. I'll just get into today's program, which looks to be really fascinating and slightly different from some of our previous conferences. Today, we're here to talk about the Taiwan-US relations, enhancing the terms of engagement in media and business and trade. And I'll be chairing this morning's first panel, which is about media literacy and fake news. We have 2 fantastic panelists with us today, whose bios you can find in the program, which hopefully you all have a copy of. Maggie Farley is a former LA Times correspondent and is currently an adjunct professor at AU. She was telling me just before we sat down and started about the game, which is referenced in her bio, factitious, which she assures me is PG, and is well used between 9 and 3, which means it's well used in schools, it sounds like. But I think we'll have some interesting conversation about fake news, and maybe how we can all check that out on is it factitiousgame.com. And Jessica Drunt, who's a fellow at the Policy Watch Institute and was previously an associate at the National Bureau of Asian Research. So with that, I'll turn it over to our speakers, who are going to each present for about 20 minutes or so, after which we'll open the floor for questions. So to follow Jessica and then...
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking Deepa and Richard for the opportunity to speak here today, and to the Seeger Center for hosting. I'd like to note these comments are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization that I'm affiliated with. I was asked to discuss Taiwan's social media landscape and its vulnerabilities to outside actors, especially as it pertains to last month's local elections. I want to start by setting the stage and quickly going over the current state of cross-strait relations. Since the current DPP president, Tsai Ing-wen, was elected in 2016, China has terminated official contacts with Taipei and increased pressure on the island, including by poaching its diplomatic allies, squeezing its international space, and sending fighter jets near Taiwan. All this has happened in spite of continued reassurances from President Tsai that she is committed to maintaining the status quo. This is not enough for Beijing, which has called for Tsai to affirm the 1992 consensus, a vague formulation centered around the notion of one China, which was used by the previous KMT administration as a baseline for official contacts. At the same time, Beijing has pursued local avenues in engaging with the island. It has continued engagement with the KMT by rewarding KMT-held districts with economic packages and exchanges with Chinese officials at the local level. Beijing's aim has been to paint the DPP in a negative light, as unfit to govern, while bolstering the KMT as a more capable alternative. Its apparent approach to social media interference falls in line with this objective, to undermine Tsai and the DPP. So just how widespread is social media usage in Taiwan? According to statistics from 2017, 80% of Taiwan's internet users actively use social media. Facebook was the most popular platform with a 77% penetration rate. Mobile messaging app Line, similar to WhatsApp here in the States, came at 71%, Twitter at 21%. However, these platforms are used in different ways for political discussions. PTT, a bulletin board system not dissimilar to Reddit, is Taiwan's most popular platform for discussing politics. As of March this year, PTT had 1.5 million registered users with 150,000 active users during peak hours. Facebook comes in second, while Line is harder to measure given that discussions are private. Twitter is used more by politicians to engage with audiences outside of Taiwan. Social media did not gain traction as a tool for political campaigns in Taiwan until the 2014 local elections, when Ko Wen-je, the independent candidate for Taipei mayor, effectively used social media to rally support. The DPP's social media strategy in 2016's presidential and legislative elections were also cited as a reason for the party's victory against the KMT that year. These trends have been explored and assessed in China, with state media citing the statistics I mentioned earlier, as well as the advantages social media has provided the DPP in the 2016 elections. Chinese universities, such as Xiamen University, have likewise conducted in-depth studies of Taiwan's social media usage. All in all, this reflects an acute understanding of the role social media plays in fostering political debate on the island and in election strategy. There have been numerous instances of Chinese interference in Taiwan's social media. Ahead of the 2016 election, Chinese internet users gained access to Facebook, which is normally blocked in China, and spammed Tsai Ing-wen's official Facebook page with critical comments. Her page was again spammed in January 2016, as was the pages of popular Taiwanese media outlets that were reporting on the election. At this point in time, it was clear that the posts came from China. The comments on the Facebook pages all used simplified characters instead of traditional characters, included line-by-line repetitions of Chinese government slogans, and featured an unwarranted degree of animosity. Studies out of Taiwan, however, have seen efforts on the Chinese side to better blend in through a localization campaign. Such moves include converting text on account and messages from simplified Chinese to traditional, and learning to imitate local waves of speech used in Taiwan. A Taiwanese scholar has also noticed a strategy focused on swaying swing voters, targeting pro-DPP pages to weaken perceptions of support, and posting positive articles about the KMT, while adding Taiwanese friends on these platforms to come off as legitimate locals. A Weibo post was circulated that outlined a quote battle plan in January 2016 that more or less substantiates these claims. The post asked participants not to swear, to keep their emotions in check, and to focus on promoting anti-independence materials. As these efforts become more sophisticated, their effects begin to take hold. The most prominent and ultimately tragic example is from September of this year during Typhoon Jebi in Japan, which knocked out a bridge and stranded thousands of travelers at the Osaka International Airport. Rumors began to circulate and were amplified by traditional media in Taiwan that the Chinese consulate had managed to deploy a bus to the airport to assist its citizens, but were refusing to aid Taiwanese at the airport unless they affirmed allegiance to Taiwan. A public outcry ensued, criticizing Tsai, the DPP representative to Japan, Frank Xie, and Taiwan's de facto consulate in Osaka. During the fallout, the head of the consulate committed suicide. Afterward, Taiwanese internet users found that the original post came from an IP address in Beijing, and Japanese officials refuted the claim, asserting that the Chinese consulate did not have access to the airport. Again, all these posts are aimed at Tsai and painting her administration as unfit to govern, and convincing social media users in Taiwan's electorate that this is the case. There have been numerous other examples, including false claims on her government's approach to the sensitive topic of pension reforms, as well as an incident when there was flooding in Tainan, posts began to circulate claiming that Tsai was unsympathetic and refused to step into floodwaters to check on victims, despite photos later emerging disproving this. So in the aftermath of last month's elections, it's worth stressing that any interference from China would be hard to source, given things like IP spoofing. It is also difficult to weigh the impact against other factors that could have determined election outcomes. In spite of this, and ultimately in the end, Beijing got what it wanted. The KMT swept the elections, and the candidates that won have called for greater engagement with China. The statements out of the Taiwan Affairs Office likewise call for local-level exchanges under the 1992 consensus, noting, and I quote, "With a correct understanding on the nature of cross-strait relations and the nature of exchanges between cities across the strait, more countries and cities in Taiwan are welcome to participate in such exchanges and cooperation. Moving forward to the new year, more KMT-held cities and counties will engage with China at the local level, while relations at the top remain frozen. What I think is important to note, however, is an unwillingness to draw parallels between the election outcome and potential Chinese meddling in Taiwan public discourse. Taiwan's government and the cyber firm FireEye have both cited strong evidence that China was playing a role. Yet, as the election results were unfolding, and even in the aftermath, there was little reference in Taiwan's mainstream media of any effect Chinese influence had on the outcome. Part of the reason interference campaigns were successful is because the societal and political divides are already there. The hyper-partisanship is already there. And we see this not just in Taiwan, but here as well. Authoritarian governments are able to localize their efforts and exacerbate existing tensions at relatively low cost to themselves. Perhaps a first step to addressing this issue is a bipartisan consensus through a working group or something similar that aims to work toward a solution. And any outside support should be disavowed, not encouraged, as undermining democratic institutions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jessica, for a succinct summary of the media landscape. We'll move on now to Maggie Farley's presentation.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to call it up again. Oh, it's there. Oh, you're right, I can't see it. Okay, so all right, I can't see it here, but you can see it there, so that's good. So I first came to Taiwan in 1996 when Taiwan was preparing for its first democratic presidential elections, and China was shooting missiles its direction. And I got to land on the aircraft carrier, the Independence, which was flying the strait to try to keep the peace. So these days, Taiwan is still having democratic elections, and China is still shooting things Taiwan's direction. But now it's not missiles, it's misinformation and disinformation. And that's my game. I'll just interrupt myself. The interface is based on Tinder, so it tests whether you swipe right if you think it's real, and left if you think it's not real. So while I was developing it, my husband looked at my phone and was like, "Why do you have Tinder on your phone?" Okay, so back to disinformation. So what we call fake news now, it's been around for a long time. It just used to be known as something else. It's been used to start wars, remember the Maine? To erase people from history, to add people from history. Anyone in the Taiwan crowd recognize these people? Anyway, former directors of the AIT were photoshopped out, a controversial author was photoshopped in. Inside joke. So we talk about misinformation and disinformation. And the difference is misinformation is sort of mistakenly spreading news that's not true, or information that's not true. And disinformation is deliberately deceiving or distorting information. And so this is what we see in our presidential elections, or in the French elections, and the German elections, trying to manipulate voter behavior. So this is an example done by the Russians, targeting people on Facebook who are likely to vote for Hillary. And it says, don't bother to vote, just text your vote in. Which, we don't know how many people believed it, but it was fake. And hoaxers, the people who create misinformation, disinformation, are very clever. They'd be great marketers because they get everybody to do their work for them. They want you to share it, and they know how to target you to make you want to share it. In fact, before our presidential election, more people shared false news on Facebook than real news. And that's when we realized we really had a problem. Because they know how to target your biases. You know, it's not really our fault that we believe this stuff. It's the way our brains are wired. And there's all sorts of biases, and we'll go through. But so today I want to talk first about why is disinformation so effective? And why has it been so effective in Taiwan in particular? Why is it such a problem there? And what can we do to detect and combat it? And what is Taiwan doing? So our brains love fake news. Oh my God, it's so exciting. Can you believe that? Oh, I'm right. I knew I was right all along. I'm going to tell everybody. This is the effect that they want to create. And they know that people are attracted to those kinds of stories, and those are the kinds of things that are going to get shared. There's also confirmation bias, which is even in the face of evidence, we like to cling to our beliefs. In fact, when we're presented with facts that show that we're wrong, sometimes people will double down and say, oh, I've been raised that way all my life, I'm not going to change my mind, you're just trying to manipulate me. Technology has its own bias. It amplifies and accelerates all of these trends. You know about bots? They're not actual robots, but they are computer programs designed to spread information much faster than a human can. And that plays into the algorithms, which looks to see what are popular in the search sites or on Twitter, what's trending, and it elevates what's popular and not necessarily what's correct. We've seen bots in lots of elections, in our elections, in the French elections, in the German elections, helped Duterte become president in the Philippines. And just this week, they found that Russian bots are fanning the flames in France with the yellow vest movements. There's also familiarity factor. The more we hear it, the more we are likely to believe it. And that is a product of the bots as well. And then misinformation, disinformation, it plays on our social bias. Because we like to be in a community, we like to create groups. But when we create a group, it also excludes people. It can create a wall to keep other people out. So the disinformation likes to play on these tensions, whether it's political or racial or religious, ethnic, or in Taiwan, the cross-straits tension. So I tell people, this is a red flag. Anytime you get a piece of information that inflames that feeling of us versus them, whether it's my football team is the best or my country is the best, beware. Because what we believe may be less about the facts or the evidence than about our loyalty to a group. You know, the fact that I think that anybody should be able to carry an automatic rifle may say less about the facts that lots of school children are unnecessarily being killed than it marks me as a member of a tribe. Not my personal belief. The other thing that they know is that we trust news from friends more than from other sources. So guess what? They want to be your friend, and they'll pretend to be your friend. So you have to ask yourself, who are they, and why are they telling you this? So this is an example from before the presidential election, when a Russian group went to Facebook and said, we want to target likely voters, supporters of Trump. And this came across the Facebook feed, and they said, press like to help Jesus beat the devil. And so if you're conservative Christian, part of this group that they're targeting, what are you going to do? Like! And then once you press like, they know that you believe what they want you to believe. They send you a friend request, and then suddenly this information is coming into your news feed as if it's from your friend. It doesn't say sponsored. It's not labeled as a political ad. It's just your friend sharing their interesting information. They even use this to help start organizing demonstrations. This is one. Down with Hillary, come demonstrate in New York City. I'm going, are you? So this disinformation, you know, it seems innocuous, it's just your news feed, whatever, but it actually has very profound effects on a society that's based on a free market of information. It causes confusion And it doesn't even have to be correct or incorrect. As long as it muddies the truth, it's very damaging. Because we make our decisions based on what we assume to be reliable information. It distorts the public debate, which is essential to a democracy. And it leads people to make uninformed choices about their life, about their health, about their leaders. So Taiwan, you can see all of these elements playing out in the disinformation that affects Taiwan. But Taiwan has a few special ingredients that make it a different case from the United States. Well, like the United States, it has it's one of the world's highest users of social media. The internet penetration is almost total. Even the old people, especially the old people, elderly people, are online and using social media. They mostly use Line, which is like WhatsApp or kind of like Twitter. There's a key existential issue, this cross-state tension. Should Taiwan be independent? Should it be autonomous? Should it be separate from China? Or should everybody be part of one big motherland? There is a lot of media. There are a lot of media in Taiwan, especially digital now. And they're often influenced very much by the social media, just like you can see here too. But in Taiwan, they call it journalism. Journalists are actually rewarded for the number of clicks they get, the number of stories they post, which doesn't foster in-depth reporting, independent reporting, or thorough fact-checking. The other is China's massive scale. Maybe you've heard of the 50-cent army, which is an arm of the military. They're cyber troops who are supposedly paid 50 cents for every post they make, and they're rewarded if it makes it into the Taiwanese official media, or off the social media into the regular media. And Taiwanese officials say that they fend off 2,500 cyber probes, attacks, and bits of disinformation a day that they know about. There's also a need for better media literacy. It's starting to be taught in the schools, and there are other tools that I'm going to show you. But in general, just like in the United States, media literacy is a relatively new phenomenon. Some people in Taiwan have told me also that their educational system doesn't foster critical thinking, and that there are educational reforms targeting that as well. So this is just an example of how fake news has real consequences, and it's amplifying on the Kansai airport incident that we just heard about from Jessica. So the story was that the only Chinese were being rescued from the flooded airport. And if you were Taiwanese, you had to pledge loyalty to say that you were a Chinese citizen to get on the bus. So this started in Chinese social media. It went to Chinese media. This is Chinese. It went to Taiwanese social media, and then into the regular media. And it caused so many people to attack the Taiwanese official in Japan that he ended up committing suicide, saying that he just couldn't bear the agony. Even though the story was wrong, the government tried to refute it, but the social media tidal wave of anger and attacks drove him to his death. So there's a small, tiny, independent fact-checking organization that just started this year, the Taiwan Fact Check Center. And so they tried to trace this back. How did this whole story start? Where did it start? How did it get so much momentum? And it was traced back to a Chinese social media user and then it got momentum on the mainland and then came through as I showed you, but they actually reported it out. And they called the Kansai airport officials, and they asked, who sent the buses to rescue the passengers? Where did they get to? And the answer was very clear, and that it wasn't the way the story had been reported in the media at all. That the Taiwanese official was not at fault. But then the Kansai airport officials asked, why are you the only one who's called? And they said that to that point, no one had really called and asked those questions. Here are some examples of fake news that I've translated that have influenced the election. This was for the presidential election a couple of years ago. There was a report on social media that Taiwan was going to lease this little island in the Spratlys, which is, as you know, contested territory, to the United States to use as a naval base. So of course this became a huge uproar between not only Taiwan and China, but the United States had to get involved as well and refute that. And you talked about this as well. So during the floods in Tainan, there's this picture of Tsai Ing-wen who went, they said, oh, she didn't even get in the water, she didn't even meet the people, and look, she's laughing at this man. This was the social media post. She's laughing at this guy, like trudging through the water. But in fact, this is the real picture. And she was waving to this guy. So it's just little things like this. There's just a constant stream of messages that are seeking to undermine one candidate or another, to inflame tensions. And you can't prove that they all come from the mainland. There are plenty of political opponents, just like here, it's very hyper-partisan. But you can get the idea of the climate. So Tsai Ing-wen, in her Facebook page, actually said, someone wants to suppress Taiwan democracy. Someone wants Taiwanese to be afraid. But it's like, we have to show with our votes that these efforts will be useless. It's pretty clear who that someone she's referring to. To which, is it Ma Xiaoguang replied, Joshua, it's fake news. But if everybody's saying that the news is fake, what is real? If the truth isn't truth, as Rudy Giuliani said, then what is the truth? It's very confusing. It's very subversive to democracy, to a real conversation, to even just making decisions in your daily life. So it leads to open questions, which we can talk about for the next half hour. What is the responsibility of the platforms to filter the news? Should there be more government regulation? And what about freedom of speech? How do you balance the need to protect people from disinformation and the need to protect people's freedom of expression? Every government in the world right now is grappling with this, and they're all coming up with different answers. So, does anybody know who this is? Yes. So, this is Audrey Tang. She is a transgender anarchist hacktivist who is now the digital minister without portfolio in the DPP. And she's always the smartest person in the room. She's amazing. She's self-educated, dropped out of school, learned everything on the internet, went to Silicon Valley, made a lot of money, and now is in the government, committed to radical transparency. Every decision is a consensus decision. She doesn't do anything top-down. I was hoping she'd be here today. Sometimes she beams in by hologram, which is really cool, and then she shrinks it down to kid size when she's speaking at schools. Maybe here she'd be like really big. And she also espouses something which I think is a really unique strategy called troll hugging, which is she can see, she has a notification bot when people are talking about her on social media, and if they're saying things that she wants to confront, she'll pop up in the chat in a little video message and say, is there something that you'd like to discuss? And it's completely disarming and very effective, because she can engage the people and actually say, why are you saying this? What sometimes people just want attention. They just need a hug. And so she calls it troll hugging. Anyway, she says, when SARS came to Taiwan, you couldn't negotiate with the virus. You can't stop it at the border. All you can do is educate people how not to get the virus and to inoculate them. And so her attitude is that's what Taiwan needs to do. Educate people, and that has been shown to be very effective because there are technological tools, which I'll show you, but it's always a cat and mouse game. So the best thing is to sharpen people's tools of critical thinking, and we all get fooled, but at least you can get people to ask questions. So this is what is happening now in Taiwan to deal with disinformation. Actually, tomorrow, there are amendments being considered. There are proposals to expand existing laws, but there has been a clamor by some politicians to make digital disinformation a criminal offense. And it sparked a big debate in Taiwan, but people were afraid that it would lead to a crackdown on freedom of speech. So it's a slippery slope. And so the government has decided to expand existing laws for fraud, libel, preventing social chaos, but not start anything new, not introduce any new legislation. Media literacy, we talked about, they're already started in the schools. A rapid response by government, because in the absence of good information is speculation. So the government is trying really hard to get responses to questions out same day. And the last, Audrey Tong's big thing, critical thinking and empathy, to teach people to question their information, to evaluate it critically, and also to expose themselves to different viewpoints so they can understand where people are coming from and what's a reasonable claim. Not to mention the troll hugging. That'd be great if we could all do that. So there are these different fact-checking centers that are popping up in Taiwan. One just started this year. It's the government real-time news clarification agency. It's a really good effort. They are committed to answering questions in the same day, so journalists can have it by deadline. But it's really hard to find. You have to go to the Executive One page and sort of go through. It's only in Chinese. And it'd be better if it were point to point, if they could find a rumor on Facebook and respond to that rumor right there where they found it on Facebook, or online, or on television. That would be more effective. There's a Taiwan Fact Check Center. They are very diligent. It's university-based, but actually run out of a small apartment by a handful of people. And then this is called Gov.0, or Gov0, who's created this bot. And it's a good bot as opposed to the evil bots out there. And it was started by one of the developers who was tired of responding to his grandmother, who's always posting, spreading conspiracy theories and rumors on the Line app, to all of her friends and to all of her relatives several times a day. And because of the hierarchy of respect in Taiwan, he couldn't keep saying, "Grandma, that's ridiculous. It's not true, don't spread it." And so he and his friends developed a bot, and he said, just friend the bot and send the piece of information to the bot. And the bot will say, this is true, this is not true. And they get an instant response. So like, Grandma, just send it to the bot before you send it to your friend. And so if you friend the bot, it's called co-facts. They're hoping to stop the spread right at the beginning. There's another tool they developed called News Helper, and it's a browser extension. It's the same Gov0. And you can download that and put it on your browser, and it'll pop up when you encounter a story, give you a little warning that it's been disputed or that it's been proved to be a rumor. These these are great ideas. They rely on volunteers right now, and so it's hard to keep up with the flow. So, you know, great in concept, could be better in execution. This is what it looks like online. You can actually go to the site and see what the latest rumors are. That's the Taiwan Fact Check Center. And this is the Executive Yuan's real-time clarification page. But even Premier Lai is saying that the government is not doing a good enough job. And he blames fake news for skewing the elections. Jessica also touched on this. They're trying to teach people how to recognize the telltales of mainland disinformation. Things like looking out for the simplified characters that aren't used in Taiwan, making it clear that it came from someplace else. But the disinformation is becoming more and more sophisticated. It looks more like native content. And now we're dealing with things like deepfakes. Has anybody seen the video of Obama, whose mouth has been manipulated to say words that he would never say? Jordan Peele did this great public service announcement. I sometimes have it, but it won't play. You should look it up on YouTube. Just Google Obama deepfake. And Jordan Peele is talking and saying, and the words are coming out of Obama's mouth. It looks pretty convincing. And, you know, he says things that Obama would never say, like, stay woke, bitches. That's really effective. But it shows what's coming. It's out there, it's not widely used, it's not completely sophisticated yet, but in 5 years, I think we're all gonna be asking whether we can believe our eyes. So the big push right now is to teach people to ask questions. Who's telling me this? What's the purpose? Where does it come from? Do other sites have this story? Even little kids can ask, who says? How do you know that? It's worth teaching people to ask. And we were also talking about how to be critical without becoming cynical and not believing anything. But if you stop and consider before you share where it's coming from, why they might want you to believe that, who benefits from the spread of this information, it can go a long way to stemming the flow of disinformation. So this is what I tell the students. Like, these are all great tools for you, but the best tool is your brain and your finger. So before you press the button to share, maybe just put your hand in your pocket, sit on your finger, and think before you share.
All right, thank you, Maggie and Jessica. We've got plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure we have a room full of questions to come. I'm going to use the prerogative of the chair and actually ask one to get the ball rolling. And you both talked a little bit about the penetration of social media in Taiwanese society. I wonder, do we know anything about the demographics? So Maggie, for instance, you were talking about a grandmother that keeps spreading these fake news. You know, are we seeing, for instance, younger people are less likely to be on Twitter and Facebook, or that there are certain platforms that certain demographic groups are prone to?
I think in terms of PTT, most of the users are college or university level graduate students and people that started using the platform when it first started, so young adults. So for that one, I think there's less older people on it.
Facebook has remarkably high penetration in Taiwan. Almost everybody's on Facebook of all demographics. Like in the United States, it's skewed towards older people now as younger people drift towards newer and more visual things. But in Taiwan and a lot of countries, Facebook is the internet. Line also, I think it's 80% penetration in Facebook, and about 60% of people get news from Facebook. And 30% of people don't believe all the news that they get on Facebook. And Line has penetration that's almost as high as Facebook. If you're using Facebook, you're also probably using Line. And the thing that surprised me is how many older people are online. It's very easy to share, to make groups, and there are also closed groups like WhatsApp, if you know WhatsApp. And so it's a little bit harder to penetrate and see where people are getting their information, where the information is coming from. The information is often divorced from context, so you don't know the source, but packaged in a way that is really exciting and easy to share.
So I open to the floor for questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Leo Bosnia, retired government worker, federal employee.
Thank you. Leo Bosnia, retired federal employee. With regard to the Taiwan government trying to get out there quickly and refute some of these things, to what extent do the Taiwan government agencies and ministries have strong public information offices and have people in there who have, let's say, journalism degrees or journalism backgrounds? Or are they simply civil servants trying to struggle with this thing?
I think the government is very serious in trying to grapple with this. And the real-time clarification thing is admirable, and I think that it has a lot of support behind it. They do have younger civil servants who are very adept in social media, guiding it and getting things out. The problem is, you have the official response, but can the average person find it? And does the average person believe it? A lot of people just discount it, saying, oh, well, that's just the government propaganda, or that's the government's position. So that's part of the problem. The other problem is that it's just not widespread enough. It's not easily findable. I mean, they're always just playing catch up, and by the time it comes to their attention, the rumor might have already been, a week old and spread to all of the social media outlets. So.
Yes.
Hi, thank you, Maggie. Listening to your presentation, I was wondering if it's like basically like going back to the basics when it comes to understanding and handling media, news, social media. I remember, since you were a kid, we were told if you are studying reading, you read all the editorial information, because that way you learn about the author, the source, the leaning of the source, to kind of be able to discern about the information. And I wonder how much of that we do now, because we get so much information at such a fast pace for so many sources. So, what would be your take on that in terms of minimum standards of dealing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is that this is really a matter of critical thinking. And in history classes, students are taught to read different viewpoints of history and to examine who wrote the history. Is it the history of the victors? Whose voices are we hearing? Whose voices are we not hearing? And those sorts of questions are questions we can bring to any bit of information. Whose voices are we hearing? Whose voices are we not hearing? Why are they telling this story? Why do they want us to believe it? I think that schools here can do a better job of teaching that critical thinking just across the board. But media literacy in particular, because media has extra challenges, because you don't know the source, or it can be a grain of truth that's manipulated or exaggerated. And so our traditional critical thinking skills sometimes are not enough when we're dealing with these new forms of information that are coming at us so quickly and from all over the place.
Hi there. My name's Dr. Akal Malik. I'm a Fulbright scholar at the Seeger Center here. So you talked a lot about disinformation coming from China. In the real world, there's a two-way street here. So it's going the other way as well. Now, the bigger issue here is that the Chinese have the Great Firewall, and getting information in, is very widely known, getting information in to the population, general average population, is not as easy as it is for China to push information into Taiwan. So what are the obstacles faced by state bodies using disinformation, and what types of disinformation occurs? I mean, you must have evidence of that as well, or do you not?
What I would really like, I agree with you that the disinformation is a two-way street, but China has more government controls. And we could talk all day about that as well. And I would like to know, at the cybersecurity level, what the Taiwanese government is able to do. I mean, it's something that they don't talk about publicly. But I thought just that statistic that they're fending off 2,500 attacks a day that they know about is significant. Disinformation can be anything from a cyber attack on a government computer network to this, this softer cultural-based muddying of the information waters. But now they're calling it sharp power instead of soft power, right? Instead of cultural influence, because it's so micro-targeted. Tell me if I'm answering your question.
I mean, I wrote about this earlier on in strategic communication. A while back, I wrote an article about how you target specific groups of people or demographics, and you tailor your message, which is the same message, but you tailor it according to the particular group that you needed to do that to. And my suspicion is that they utilize easy access into different types of social media in China, not the general ones that they use maybe in Taiwan, but to get the information across. It's just what the controls are in China, for example, and how to circumvent them. I think a lot of people are interested in that kind of view anyway, so are they not?
How to circumvent the controls in China?
Well, it's not very difficult. Whenever I'm there, I use a VPN, so I get
Right.
access to anything I want.
Right.
But
right.
they get shut down very quickly nowadays.
That's
so
true.
Within
And,
minutes, literally. So.
As a foreign correspondent, I was based in China for several years. And it was earlier and the technology was cruder, but VPNs were the easy way to get around. And you're right, it was a constant cat and mouse game. You'd identify a VPN, use it until it gets shut down. You identify another one. People use codes. People use, I used to get invitations to coffee over electronic greeting cards that you have to type in a code to enter from dissidents who didn't want the information to be monitored. Anytime I tried to use anything encrypted on my computer, our network would suddenly stop working. So there are all sorts of ways. I have a friend who has millions of followers on WeChat, and found that the government was able to isolate groups of his followers, and so the message, something he would tweet or put on WeChat, would go out to certain groups and not get delivered to other groups. So the controls are very sophisticated, but so are the users, and so it's just a constant game of cat and mouse.
I am Garrett Van der Wees, former editor of Taiwan Communique. Thanks very much for the excellent presentations, both of you. Both of you touched on the issue of how to distinguish disinformation from real facts. And that's getting to be increasingly difficult. And one example, case in point, is the election of the mayor in Kaohsiung. Some people say that he was elected because the Chinese media hyped up his candidacy, therefore he got more and more of a following. Others say, well, he's a real populist. He said, I'll make Kaohsiung great again, and people believed him. So how do you move forward in that kind of situations?
Well, it's hard to measure exactly the amount of influence disinformation had on candidate's selection, right? There's so many other factors at play. Given that it was a local election, personality played a big role. Also just natural dynamics in the democratic system, that Kaohsiung was held by the DPP for a significantly long time. So I think it's hard to extract exactly how much of an impact these factors played in, but in the end, it did result in his selection, and China got what it wanted. So it is important for the government and other democracies to look at how to minimize impact and how to counteract disinformation.
Yeah, I think that's a great.
That's a great answer. It's clear that there were bread and butter issues, and I think that it's convenient sometimes for politicians to have fake news to point to. Hillary blames the Russians, and in Kaohsiung they can say it's because of the mainland. I mean, even the premier is saying our government isn't good enough at stopping fake news, and that's why it was part of a memo about why they lost the election. And so pointing the finger there. But what's clear is that the makers of disinformation are able to identify, whether they're internal actors or external actors, are able to identify tensions within the country and then use their tools to inflame those tensions and widen rifts.
Thank you for the very informative presentations. My name is Nobuo Kumura. I'm a Fulbright visiting scholar at Segal Center and also a regional area journalism professor in Japan. How do you say, well, what's your assessment of the short-term goals of the Chinese cyber disinformation operation? Create anger, create confusion, and what's next? So what's their strategy from your assessment? Thank you.
I think in the particular case of the local elections, it was to help KMT candidates so that they have more opportunities to do local level cross-strait exchanges with China, and then give them the opportunity to demonstrate their ability to govern and help the KMT with the 2020 elections on the national level.
Yeah, it's been said that the local elections were a trial run for the presidential elections. But the long-term goal is to undermine Taiwan's aspirations to be autonomous, to have a well-working democracy, and to be sort of a demonstration or an example for the mainland. The ultimate goal is reunification.
Hi, my name is Nathaniel Callum, senior studying Asian studies and Chinese here at GW. My question is, so there's a large basket of issues such as the recognition, or the pressures that China's putting on other countries to withdraw the recognition of Taiwan. They're considered broadly as a coercive strategy against Tsai Ing-wen. I guess my question, it might be a bit speculative, do you see this sort of disinformation campaign as something specific as a course of action against Tsai Ing-wen, or a new normal that would continue under a KMT government at the national level post-2018 or 2020?
I think that after Tsai Ing-wen was elected on a platform of Taiwan autonomy, even pro-independence, that she became a particular target, and a KMT official who wanted to keep things status quo or even become closer to China would not have become that sort of target. But if you're looking at the long-term goals of ultimate reunification, then you could argue that any Taiwanese leader who doesn't actively aim for that is also a target.
I would say that social media wasn't really on China's radar until the 2014-2016 elections, so we don't have prior examples of them potentially using disinformation against KMT candidates. I think what will be interesting to see is if there's factions in the KMT, if there's any disinformation out pitching, say, the local factions versus the more pro-China factions. We saw this more in state media, not in fake news, but that China was supporting KMT members like Hong Shou-tu over people of the local faction, like the current chair, Wu Deni.
Henry Henker, retired government. We have a Voice of America. I presume there's a Radio Taiwan, and I wonder about the quality of their broadcasts as far as disinformation or some problem areas that you may have detected.
Does anybody here listen to Voice of
Yes.
America?
We're on a Radio Taiwan. Voice of America is the US government
Right.
agency.
There is Radio Taiwan.
Yeah, so there, he's talking about Radio Taiwan.
Yeah, no, she's just distinguishing between Radio Taiwan and Voice of America, which is under the BBG. But you're asking whether Voice of America is viewed as disinformation in Taiwan,
No,
or whether how it counters disinformation?
I wondered what your feelings are on Radio Taiwan as far as the information that they are supplying.
I can't speak to that because I don't live in Taiwan and I don't hear it, but.
I can't speak to it either.
Can anybody in the room?
I'm Mike Fonte, I work for the DPP here in Washington. You can go to the website, RTI, and check it out. I think they probably presume, and when I read it, it's like AP or something. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think it's propaganda in the same sense of disinformation. It's my opinion, but you can go check it out anytime you want.
All right, I'm cognizant that we have a short break for lunch, where we'll be reconvening for our second panel at 1 o'clock. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up. I would just reflect as a historian of the 19th century, the irony of the CCP putting the arms of the People's Republic of China in support of the KMT in a local election must have Mao turning in his grave. Now, with that said, we have lunch served. Is it set up in the back, Richard? Set up in the back. We have bento boxes. It's a short working lunch. I know there were some questions that we were unable to get to. I'm sure our speakers would be happy to chat with you informally, and then we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. All right, thank you very much, everyone.